Hi, I'm Dr. Yeoh Pei Ann from University Technology Mara, and I will be presenting on improvising and collaborating in isolation. When COVID-19 pandemic brought about global isolation, many were unprepared to move into a digital workspace. And with limited understanding of how the disease would continue to disrupt our lives, one could not foresee the necessity of adopting wholesale digital changes. The implementation of online education was mostly designed to manage basic challenges of delivering teaching, with little oversight for how meaningful learning can take place. That aspect of education was largely left to the students to establish. For performing arts subjects, the approach of online education was generally viewed as limited and unpopular. The nature of study, which is dependent on real-time engagement and collaborative practice, seemed unsuitable to the demands of an isolated approach. Increasingly, the education process is one that is developing away from knowledge as stored artifact to knowledge as action. Learning then is not merely an act of receiving knowledge, but should be viewed as a process which involves interacting with others and the environment around us. This is largely the challenge that was faced by many educators when considering how an online education could offer a meaningful learning experience to students without compromising its academic integrity. Nevertheless, the enforced isolation between 2020 and 2021 was an opportunity to explore new mediums, to improvise and interact with the digital tools available to us. This paper will explore the ways in which a music improvisation course was carried out via an online platform. I will consider the background and experience of the students, measuring their expectations against those of the course content. I'm mindful of the issues and challenges faced by students in learning improvisation for the first time, and they are magnified further by the need to adopt an online approach. Subsequently, I will share how the deliverables of the course are strategized for digital output with influences from the practices of other improvisation groups. Finally, I will offer a brief reflection in online approaches to learning improvisation while interrogating collective collaborations in isolated forms. Over the span of 4 semesters from 2020 to 2021, I taught techniques of improvisation at UITM to a group of students from mixed musical backgrounds and specializations. Most of them were studying classical music, with only a handful majoring in contemporary or pop musical styles. Each semester had about 12 to 15 students, with a variable number of instrumentalists and vocalists. The course was structured to expose students to various techniques of improvisation, ranging from jazz to free improvisation. While there are some taught theoretical components with written assignments, most of the assessments are practice-based. At the beginning of semester, students are invited to share their expectations of the course. One of the most common responses was that they would learn to play jazz. And while jazz has long had a stereotypical association with improvisation, it encompasses only a part of what it is to engage with improvisation in musical practice. That jazz utilizes improvisation is incidental and not instrumental to form. So one of the aims of the course is to broaden the students' understanding of improvisation, whereby it's not merely a means to an end, but as a way of making music, it can serve many ends. Nevertheless, jazz improvisation was taught as part of the course. And while the traditional approach of learning to play jazz by jamming together was suspended due to pandemic restrictions, online resources of backing tracks and digital scores offered an accessible approach to learn jazz remotely, even in physical isolation. However, free improvisation proved to be more complicated to establish for online teaching and learning, and conceptually is the form which students struggled to perceive and engage with in what Derek Bailey labels as non-idiomatic improvisation. Away from the platform of jazz, students had limited knowledge on how improvisation can be utilized, and thus what to play. The seemingly abstract nature of improvisation can also be influenced by the collective ability of the group to communicate, who one plays with, what is being listened to, and how each one of us respond musically. Studies by scholars such as Bartley, Bishop, and Goebel have shown the importance of musical communication for musicians to play together coherently. Body gestures also support how performance intentions are shared among ensemble members, transforming disparate parts into whole music. And while these studies were based on the performance of classical music, it is possible to understand how musical communication is applicable across all styles and forms of ensemble playing, improvisation included. These are the modes of engagement which were lacking due to pandemic restrictions, limiting our physical interactions. As we found early on, it was not so much real-time engagement which posed a challenge, but in-person interactions which were missing from our online classes. That is, while one can engage with classroom in real time, it was not possible to play music together, where in-person interaction is essential for students to learn about listening, musical communication, and spontaneous expression. And one of the earliest concerns when physical isolation was imposed broadly was how an ensembles to perform together. How can we construct an online setting that can replicate a live improvisatory experience? Is liveness an essential quality for learning improvisation? What degree of liveness is required for improvisation to take place? And crucially, what implications may arise for the end of semester assessments in the absence of live ensemble work? These are some of the questions I asked of myself in preparation for online teaching. Looking to other professional music groups and organizations as my first point of reference, I asked, how are professional music groups making themselves relevant to the music making process that must now take place virtually? And what measures can I adopt for an online learning? The London Improvisers Orchestra was one such group which offered isolated approaches for its members to participate collectively during widespread pandemic restrictions. So the London Improvisers Orchestra, or the LIO, is an ensemble which explores free and conducted improvisation, performing every first Sunday of the month in London. And when COVID-19 restrictions were put in place from March 2020, the LIO rallied to keep the music going virtually. And I participated in some of their virtual activities, and I will examine two of these approaches, which I adopted for the classroom. Word cues. So LIO practiced conduction or conducted improvisation for many years. It's a form of hand signals and cues that was pioneered by American composer Butch Morris. So due to suspension of physical performances, LIO's longtime member, Caroline Crabell, created a conduction piece using word cues for a group of isolated individuals. It was designed as a 10-minute piece with 20 cues lasting 30 seconds each. Each cue would be shown on large instruction cards in a specific order, and Crabell would visit each musician to conduct them from a distance due to physical isolation. And some musicians, like myself, would be conducted via video call. Each musician will record themselves for the duration of the piece and submit the audio recordings to Crabell to be compiled into an ensemble piece. And this was the ideal setup for an online alternative. Using the Google Meet platform, students were shared a set of cues and instructions via PowerPoint, ranging from tutti, silence, imitate a sound, birds, siren, solo. A cue with individual numbers indicated the number of musicians playing at any one time. This would require some measure of observation, anticipation, and control. Microphones on Meet are muted, and a secondary device, usually a mobile phone, was used to record their playing in response to the given cues. And at the end of the exercise, students submitted their audio track to Google Classroom to be collated into an ensemble piece. The results have been mixed, particularly as majority of the class were new to improvisation and found it difficult to express on their instruments by themselves. Because the whole class was muted to each other for the duration of the piece, it added an awkwardness and increased self-consciousness felt by all. Initially, I would join in the early attempts unmuted as a kind of improvisatory guide and support to the students and the process. And then as we attempted subsequent rounds, the students began to lead each other with more confidence. Yet some lingering challenges remained. For example, with ensemble cues, which caused some hesitancy between students, each unwilling to be the first to engage. And on reflection with students, many admitted to waiting for someone else or myself to lead. A discussion followed on trying to understand how collective improvisation can manifest power relationships, as we were guided by the presence of each other, albeit a virtual one. The difference between the LIO and classroom experience was that the students were improvising in real time and could observe their classmates through their video feed. It offered them the possibility of reading their body gestures and anticipating when a musician might respond to an ensemble cue. By contrast, in my LIO experience, I could only imagine what the ensemble response might be and improvise to my imagination. Therefore, the experience of group dynamics is more tangible in our virtual classroom than in LIO's asynchronous conduction. We soon found the issue of listening to each other was our forefront challenge. This was especially important in the context of new improvisers learning to generate sound material spontaneously and collectively. Yet ours was not a unique problem. Ensembles worldwide faced similar challenges of hearing and therefore performing with each other in real time. And without a host of audio and technical support, it was nearly impossible to set up an equal participation virtual space for the students. Other issues were also found in the conduction method. The approach of using word cues occasionally limited the students' ability to imagine a sound beyond what is stated, for example, staccato or glissando. And while using technical terms may not always translate equally across different instruments, it can also be seen as an opportunity to interpret them for their own instruments as an improvisatory response. Conceptual cues like steps or imitate were found to be too abstract for them initially. These and other reflections were discussed in class after each improvisation session. And subsequently, we tried a different approach. In encouraging students to develop a vocabulary of expression, I wanted to go beyond word cues and have students respond to oral cues, as listening is the natural disposition of most music improvisation. I found chain reactions to be a suitable concept created by LIO as part of its pandemic response to improvise collectively and collaboratively. Chain reactions is based on an initial recording, again by Caroline Crabell, with instructions to LIO members to record themselves improvising to and with it, and then sending the collated material to another musician who will then add on to the new track. The chain aspect of this piece can extend to as many iterations, developing in mutual consent between the last musician and the next one. It's also possible for the chain to weave back to a prior musician, therefore increasing the interest for how one may respond to the track the second time round. The piece is complete when the last musician decides so. The length of the piece is not dependent on the initial recording and could even extend beyond in subsequent chains. So we replicated this in the classroom with me providing the initial recording for students to work with. I passed it on to 2 students of my choice for them to improvise over it and share with their next collaborator. There was a shared sense of creative responsibility as the piece is gradually built by each musician in the chain, building on a collective idea of improvisation. This form of improvisation, while asynchronous, also lends perspective to use silence as part of shaping the overall outcome of the improvisation. My initial recording, which I gave to the class, was one that had intentional gaps of silence, giving space for other imaginary future musicians to fill. Silence became the lesson for students to learn as a valid response in improvisation. Participating in improvisation need not always be expressed orally, as silence can hold space for other material to be heard. At the end of semester, we compared our experience between word cues and chain reactions in a semester where hybrid teaching was allowed. When word cues was attempted in class, students found themselves at either ends of the spectrum, between all-in boldness and tentative forays into the collective improvisation. We found that attitudes towards improvisation was bound by social comfort in freely expressing oneself. Some demonstrated a go-for attitude, while some adopted a wait-and-see approach. As we did several more rounds of word cues, students became more confident with their responses, but with a growing confidence, other ensemble issues emerged. Louder instruments such as brass, percussion, or voice tended to overpower the softer instruments like wind or strings, causing some imbalance to texture and dynamics. Furthermore, the act of listening became secondary to improvising. Students admitted to finding it difficult to focus on meaningful improvisation, fearing that staying silent was an indication of their inability to perform. There was a significant effort in perpetually making a sound to fit in, that there was little awareness of listening to each other. Silence then was an important lesson for them to learn in shaping the improvisatory process. Silence allows us to listen to the collective, find meaning in one's respective role, and ultimately learn to play together. Silence was more thoughtfully attempted in chain reactions. Through their individual decision-making, students were able to influence a part of the piece in the process. Because it was an asynchronous process, this allowed them to listen first before generating their material, though of course they were encouraged to just respond in real time of their listening. Students were also more conscious of leaving space where necessary, knowing that there may be another collaborator in the next chain. So I will now play chain reactions featuring two groups of students from the same class. The tracks are based on very, very short chains. So if you wish to get a fuller sense of the process, I recommend listening to LIO's version, which spawned 22 different chains, each of which are incredibly diverse and averaging around about 4 musicians per chain. So let's listen to our classroom one. This is by the first group of instruments, violin, and then horn, voice, piano in that order. All right, and now we'll listen to the second group of chain reactions. All right. Finally, the class performed in a collaboration with dance and theater students as part of a final assessment project. This opportunity came about through pandemic necessity, with both departments seeking digital and virtual alternatives. The aim of the collaboration was to expose students to an interdisciplinary performance as a platform to expand their creative vocabulary, both as musician and dancer. Through it, students applied a range of methods that we used throughout the semester, from word cues to chain reactions to provide a musical response to the visual presentation from the dance and theater students. It highlighted the value of interdisciplinary collaboration in developing artistic skills. And today, because of our limited time, I will not play you any excerpts, but instead leave you with the links for you to explore in your own time. These collaborations were based on a combination of virtual and physical productions, and I'm sure you will find them incredibly interesting. So I thank you for your time, for listening, and I look forward to hearing your comments and taking any questions after this. Thank you very much.